Hello Admirals and welcome back to my channel where I talk to you about Battlefleet Gothic, the space fleet game based in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. Sorry if my voice is a little croaky, I've been very unwell this week. I'm going to try and persevere though. I've been asked by numerous people in the communities across Instagram, Facebook, Discord and here on YouTube to do videos on the various fleets that I have. And I jumped and said, yes, I'll do that at some point. But then I realised I've actually got close to about 40 fleets. That's like 40 videos. And I thought, oh, yeah, we'll do it. And people have asked sort of, can you showcase the videos, the fleets? Can you go into a bit of the lore, the conversions, what the ships are and that sort of thing. And I thought, yeah, that's cool. But maybe I should do a little bit of an introduction video on where they all kind of sit in my head space, I suppose, and why I've kind of got to where I've got to go. I've got been, you know what I mean? So it's kind of like, how have I come to this? How have I got this many ships and where do they all sit in the world that I've kind of built in my head? And if you're interested in building your own ships and things like that, and coming up with lore and new stuff yourself, how do you go about doing that? So I thought I'd do a real brief video kind of on that. Before I kind of kick into it, I kind of want to give a little bit of a background though. I'm old, and I got back into Warhammer. I was a young kid, and then back in the early 2000s, around uni time, I got back into the hobby with a couple of uni friends of mine that I lived with, and we played Epic and Battlefleet Gothic, Warhammer and things like that. So I'm very much of this generation where, you know, Games Workshop gave you how to make your own terrain and things like that, and you know, annuals of collector's guides and things like that. So very much a collector. I loved making my own stuff, and then a lot of the old stuff, they actively encouraged you to create your own stuff and create your own worlds, and that was always part of the game and the hobby that I always loved, and the universe of what drew me in. Creating your own lore, creating your own terrain to talk to narrative, and what does this terrain actually mean? You know, this is an old Epic model for Mortarion that they use as a thing. Well, what does this mean? You know, what objective is this, and what's the history behind this? And that's kind of the basis in which I've based most of my hobby, really. I'm not a huge fan of doing box art. I like doing my own lore, my own schemes and things like that, which comes across. If you look at my Instagram, you can see I've got my own chapter. I have my own Imperial Guard force. I have my own Sisters of Battle. I have my own Chaos forces, my own War Master that's in my sector, and I have my own little subsector that's kind of floating around in the Ultima Segmatum down on sort of the southeastern fringe. And so I loved all of that, and that's where all of that, that's why I've created what I've done and all that sort of thing. And so that gives you kind of a basis of why I've done a lot of stuff. It's because that's part of the hobby I just love. I love coming up with narrative and stories and playing in those sorts of, playing the games in that narrative. I'm very much a narrative wargamer in that sense. I like creating those. What's the purpose of this fleet, for example, being where it's supposed to be? Things don't just happen by chance. They're usually there on a mission. Well, what is that mission, and who are they running into, and that sort of thing. So that's kind of the basis of a lot of stuff. So that to give you a bit of history about me, I suppose. And the game, when I kind of came back into it, and prior to that in the 90s and 80s, was about that. It was about creating your own stories. And while they encouraged this sort of stuff and gave you all the kind of the tools and stuff, they wanted you to create your own chapters of Space Marines. And there were 2 missing Primarchs. Originally, that was kind of the idea that, well, you'd potentially create your own Primarchs party story, right? And that's what I really love. So that kind of gives you a bit of a basis for that. So then we're into the Turbidious sector, and where all my fleets and kind of my Warhammer 40,000 races and armies and stuff kind of exist. So I wanted, I've always, like I said, wanted to do the narrative style things, and I kind of wanted somewhere that all my little battles and things like, no matter what the game was, could live. That's basically what it is. So back in the early 2000s, when I lived with my 2 housemates, and they know who they are, we were playing all these games. we were kind of coming up with ideas and planets and things like that, and we would do things. And we played a campaign for Battlefleet Gothic and came up with our own worlds. And I have no idea what any of those are anymore, or anything like that. But as geologists, there's a lot of funny terms in geology. We're quite immature in many respects, right? Some of the naming things. And I'm not going to post any silly things here because it's a surefire way for getting your video removed from YouTube, I reckon. But if you're interested in silly geology names and some of the silly things that people have come up with, just Google it. But one of those silly names then was the basis of Turbidious. And that's kind of where it came from. It was just three geologists taking the mick back in the early 2000s and having a laugh, thinking one particular word was silly. And it kind of went from there. And it kind of also is a nice thing, because every time I think about it, I go, well, that was part of a time when the three of us mates, and we're still mates, we still talk to each other very often, and all three of us still in Warhammer. All three of us are trying to work out where we can all go to Warhammer World together at some point in the near future. Hopefully this year, maybe this year. But I digress. So it's a nice callback to that. So if anyone ever wondered about what Turbidious is and all this, it's a callback to mates back in the day and a silly geology term and all that sort of stuff. And then from there, over the years, I wanted to kind of make my own stuff from it. And then slowly but surely, kind of grew into, well, I'm going to make my own sector. And where can I put my sector? And what are all the planets and what we're fighting over? And you kind of got to have a number of subsectors, because otherwise not everyone's going to be, not all the races you want to build are going to be in the same sector, Tom. So you've got to make a real good narrative reason why that Tau fleet is there and why the Tyranids here, and that sort of thing. So it kind of slowly, and it's grown into, and I've forgotten things over the years. I've forgotten names and things like that and what I've done in the past. But it's just become a cool little thing that I've got going for me and all that. So I'm just going to show you a couple of little things from my website that I've posted up. So if you're interested in any of that, I'll show you in the next little bit. This is my website, portinvictor.weebly.com. And I missed Port more. Basically, when that went down years ago, I missed all the resources that it had and all that. So I wanted to, later in the years, I wanted to create a place where I could store all the information, basically, and if like-minded individuals were interested, then they could read it about the stories of the different fleets and things like that, and battles that I'd done. And then it kind of has grown organically over the years to have the painting competition and guest articles and guest stories, things like that, which is great, and it's wonderful to see. And I've got to add, I keep forgetting, I've got to add more stuff to it, to be perfectly honest. Got so many fleets I haven't added onto it, Howling Griffins and the Dwarves and things like that, for example. And so over the years, years and years ago, I created some maps of the sector purely in paint. The word paint, I did this. So they're very, very rudimentary and rustic, should we say. But they work, and they give me a bit of understanding. I've forgotten a lot of the names, where they came from, forgotten a lot of sort of the lore myself, to be honest, and this is why you keep notes, everyone. And it's been good. It's been good fun to set things in this sector. There's various subsectors which have different conflicts going on. My recent one-page rule campaigns are being set in one of them at the moment, and as systems come back and they're telling a story in that part of the world, and so players actively get a chance to partake in that. And I really wanted to set the sector in a part of the Warhammer 40,000 universe that kind of no one had really gone for. I looked in the lore to try and find if there was any bits of space that no one had kind of claimed, and down in this sort of southeastern bit of Viltamar segment, this didn't seem to be very much going on. It seemed a bit of a void. Space pun for everyone, but so I just set it there for that reason. It kind of made sense as well with I wanted to include all the different races. Yes, that seems cheaty and a bit and very gamey and sort of thing, but I wanted to have every fleet, right? So I wanted to make sense narratively that every fleet would be there. So it makes sense when you have the Tau that they've got to be around the Eastern Fringe Way as well, and everyone else can basically be everywhere. So that was kind of posted down there. There didn't seem to be much in the lore, and there kind of be nothing there in the actual official canon, although I still subscribe to everything is canon, nothing is potentially true. That's definitely a mantra of mine when I'm creating stuff. There's even looking back at some of these maps and things like that, I go, oh, did I really say that? Did I really write that name? That's a silly name, isn't it? So I may have to one day go back and do this in a little bit more professional manner, I think, and actually create a proper map. And if anyone has any tools or websites that they know that can do that, hit me up in the comments. I'd love to see them. I didn't want this video just to be about me talking about my little sector. It's not a fresh new idea. Loads of people across the world have created their own planets and fleets and narrative and stories and sectors and things like that. So it's not a new concept by any stretch of imagination. However, I did want to provide some resources that, so it's not just about me, but resources that you may be able to use to create yourself. And when I started doing this, there wasn't really much out there. Now, thanks to the internet, there's vast amounts of information that people have put online to help people create things, and it's a wonderful time if you want to kind of go down that narrative sense. I mean, AI, things like ChatGPT alone allows you to write things very, very quickly if you want, and that's an obvious tool to use. But there are brilliant things online that you can use, and things like the Smotherman formula that you'll hear, and I'm probably pronouncing that horrific, the Smotherman formula. And this is a really old concept that, and it's an equation that was created by the Battlefleet Gothic community to create ships. And it's essentially a series of adding up points for different weapon systems and different hull classes, and then you create a ship from it. And it's the basis. It's a bit rudimentary tool, but it's the basis for a lot of people's creations, from small escorts to frigates to assault carriers to the big Gloriana classes and bigger dreadnoughts that you might have seen floating around, fan-made. So if I would suggest, if you want to create a ship, and you have an idea that may have not been done before, you never know, and you want to give it a go, then I'll put a link of all of this in my chat in the comments as well. But it's a good start, and it gives you an opportunity to create a ship, any race really, and get a points value for it. So you can start playing with it and testing it out and seeing if it actually makes sense. Like I said, it's a bit rudimentary, but it's a good starting point, a good tool to start with, to then progress with any idea that you have. So that's a good start. Now, to create some planets, loads of tools out there, but one particular good one which kind of randomly generates some kind of planets for is called rollgenerator.com. And it even has some cool narrative bits in it, it can randomly generate you a planet that's being eaten by a Catan from the Necrom sort of lore, which is really cool. And you may not think, I'm not sure about that, but to start a story, and then you kind of want to know more about, well, are the fleets going there to stop that, or are they a Necron fleet trying to help it, etc. Or when is this based? What time period is this based in? Things like that. So yeah, rollgenerator.com is a cool tool that I've used to kind of come up with some worlds and some cool story elements that you can bring in. I really like that one. It's pretty neat. Pretty cool. And it was originally used to kind of generate RPG elements for Warhammer Dark Heresy, the Dungeons and Dragons kind of system. So it can kind of produce quite some cool, really, if you're into the narrative, it's going to create some cool stuff for you. But what about names as well? So there's a really, really cool website, which I'm sure many people know about, but Realm of Chaos has loads of different name generators, and they're random, and they go from Space Marine individual sort of captains and lieutenants to ships, to worlds, to systems, to individual Chaos characters, Eldar, whatever, Necromunda gangs, whatever you want. So Realm of Chaos is a great option for you want to just generate some funky names for your world, so you don't have to then try and come up with some random ones like I did back in the day when I started creating my various different subsectors. I just started picking names out of the air. I wish these tools were kind of around when I started doing it, and I'm tempted to go back and redo all of this again, and kind of a lot of the names that I generated back in the day probably don't make any sense anymore. So yeah, things like Nightfall, for instance, it's a bit rubbish, right? You can tell it's a 20-year-old 20 years ago thinking, you know what I mean, or longer in some instances. So I really like those tools. I think they're really, really cool. They add, they're a great basis for you to start creating all these cool different narrative elements, from creating the ships and then ships' names to the captains on board, through to the planets they could be fighting over, to the systems they could be fighting in, and then you know, the broader worlds, I suppose, and within the broader spectrum of the Imperium and the galaxy at large. So there you go, Admirals. A little bit of a background on the Turbidious sector. I love the fact that it's kind of grown over the years, just organically, by me adding stuff to it. But then meeting people in the community has meant that others have added to it, and they've put things in, planets in. I love the fact that my mate Jimmy, the dropbear.au on Instagram, has his own sector called the Calamus sector, and for us to kind of be able to narratively talk about our battles and things like that, and it makes sense to them be there. He's positioned it right next door to mine, so it makes sense. And then we've included, they've contributed a fleet to my fleet and that sort of thing. So I love the fact that it's kind of grown into a bit more of a community thing, and I love the fact that people have set things. They've messaged me, can I set my battle in this particular bit? Yes, certainly, 100%. Let's do it. And I love it, and it's I love the fact we've been able to base it from my recent couple of campaigns of one-page rules, which is actively then changing something in the sector, and then all the players are getting involved with that and love it and love the story. So the narrative element to me has always been the best part of telling those stories. Always been the best part of this hobby for me. So I love the fact that people are keen on it too, and like-minded people, right? So if you have your own sector, and you have your own, there's kind of a background to mine, and the kind of the reasonings behind why now fleets kind of appear, and kind of the ideas. It gives you a little bit of background of why certain fleets are kind of floating around, I suppose, and certain races are there and things like that. And I'll go into more detail about those things in the individual fleet showcase videos, I think. But if you have your own planets and systems and sectors, and your thoughts, put them in the comments. I love reading about it. If you have a website that talks about it, or anything like that, or your own chapter of Space Marines, or your own Eldar Craft World, that sort of thing, or an Orc War, whatever it might be, let me know in the comments. I love seeing these sorts of stories and the basis of things. Even if it's an individual ship, Admirals, a character ship is always welcome to me. I love it. So yeah, this gives you a little bit of a background on the Turbidious sector per se, and a little bit of resources to help, hopefully, guide you in building your own in the future. And I'll put all the links and stuff into the comments as well. Until the next video, Admirals, and I think I'll put up a poll to see which fleet you'd like to check out first, I suppose. Thanks, Admirals. See ya.